I wasn't raised in the church. No Sunday school, no pastor shaping my worldview. My only exposure to the Bible was Greatest Hits Volume 1, usually in cartoon form on a Sunday morning. You know, all the PG-rated stories. Noah's Ark, Adam and Eve, with cute animals, talking snakes, the digestible stuff. And honestly, growing up, I never had any desire to read the Bible. I believed in a God, sure, but I never believed it was some old man in the sky waiting to punish me for being bad. It wasn't until years later, when I learned about the giants, that my interest was piqued. So when I opened the Bible as an adult, I was coming from a place of curiosity, with unprogrammed eyes. And when you read these stories without the childhood filter, without the pressure to believe, without the idea that your soul depends on obedience, the text, the history, the mythology, the archaeology, and even the patterns that show up in prophecy and psychic readings like Edgar Cayce, you start noticing things you weren't supposed to notice. Patterns, connections, contradictions. I'm a pattern recognizer by nature, and once these threads started appearing, I couldn't stop connecting them. The book most people believe is the unchanging Word of God looked less like divine revelation and more like a crime scene. Pages missing, translations altered, contradictions patched over with theology. And the deeper I dug, the more obvious it became. This isn't just a holy book. It's a layered narrative shaped by centuries of political agendas. It's been smoothed, censored, and stitched back together to tell one specific story. And the God we were told to worship, he just might not be who we think he is. Most people have no idea that the Bible in their hotel drawer is a translation of a translation of a translation. And with every new version, the story shifted to match the agenda of whoever happened to be in power at the time. To understand how deep this goes, you have to go back to the beginning. What was the first version? Where did it come from? What's the actual timeline? If you go back to one of the earliest full versions of the Bible, the Septuagint, it was created in Alexandria around 250 BCE, written in Greek for Jewish communities living all across the Mediterranean. These were the Jews who no longer spoke Hebrew. Greek was their everyday language. And this Greek version is older than Jesus, older than Christianity, older than the Pharisees and the rabbinic system, and it was the Bible quoted by the writers of the New Testament. But the version most modern Bibles are based on? That's the Masoretic text. It wasn't finalized until roughly 900 to 1000 CE. That's 1,000 years after Jesus, and over a millennium after the Septuagint. So, why does this matter? Because somewhere between Alexandria and medieval Europe, the story changed. In the Septuagint, you see remnants of an ancient worldview, a divine council, multiple heavenly beings, sons of God, angels ruling regions, a cosmology that matches what we see in archaeology and myth across the ancient Near East. But in the Masoretic text, those beings suddenly vanish. They are replaced with sons of Israel, a phrase that makes no historical sense because Israel didn't exist yet. This wasn't a typo. This was a deliberate theological edit. They literally erased the divinity out of the story to make their God look like the only God in existence. Why would they do this? Because a tribal storm deity in a divine council is one thing, but a singular, absolute, unquestionable God? That, my friends, is power. In the older texts, you see a crowded spiritual world. You see hierarchy. You see multiple divine beings interacting with humanity. But in the newer, edited texts, they are erased, scrubbed, redacted to protect the narrative. that Yahweh wasn't one God among many, he was the only God. Before we go any further, I need to say something that'll make the whole story snap into focus. The serpent was never the villain. Not originally. Across the ancient world, the serpent wasn't a symbol of evil. It was a symbol of wisdom, healing, rebirth, knowledge. The very things religions later told us to fear. In Sumer, Ningazida, the lord of the good tree, was a serpent god of healing and transformation. In Egypt, Wajet, the great serpent goddess, protected the pharaohs and symbolized sovereignty and divine sight. In Greece, the staff of Asclepios, still used in medical logos today, is literally a serpent wrapped around a pole. In India, the Nagas were serpent beings of wisdom who guarded sacred knowledge. And in Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was the bringer of learning, astronomy, and civilization. The serpent was the teacher, the healer, the initiator, the symbol of awakening. But somewhere along the line, all that changed. The serpent went from wisdom to Satan faster than you can blink. And that wasn't an accident. Every empire that wanted control had to demonize the symbol that represented enlightenment. Even St. Patrick, the patron saint of Ireland, is celebrated for driving out the serpents. But did you know there were never any snakes in Ireland? What he actually drove out was the old pagan wisdom, the Druids, the goddess traditions, the people who followed the serpent of knowledge, not the Roman Church. Once you understand that the serpent equals wisdom, you start to see the real war that's been happening for thousands of years. A war between the seekers of knowledge and the systems that needed humanity to remain in ignorance in order to survive. And as researcher Matt LaCroix pointed out, a war between the eagle and the serpent. Once you realize the text itself was edited, the next question becomes, who protected those edits? Because changing the words wasn't enough. They had to silence the people who remembered the older story, the ones who knew the versions before the edits. Enter the Roman Catholic Church. Most people think the Inquisition was where it all started, like it was simply a theological debate that got out of hand. But the truth is much darker. The Church's war on the older teachings began before the Inquisition. First came the Crusade, not the famous one in the Middle East, but a crusade launched on Christian soil, the Albigensian Crusade. This was an organized, systematic extermination of anyone who preserved the older, pre-edited teachings, especially the Gnostic ones, like the Cathars of southern France. They were Christians, but they didn't buy into the rewritten narrative. They believed the God of the Old Testament was a deceiver, a false God ruling over the material world. They rejected the violent, jealous Yahweh, and for that, the Church massacred them by the thousands. It was a full-scale military genocide. But they didn't stop there. The Crusade killed the people. The Inquisition hunted the survivors. They didn't just kill the Cathars. They erased them, burned their texts, smeared their beliefs, wiped them off the map to bury the secret they were protecting. Anyone and anything that preserved the original story had to be destroyed. And here's the funniest part. The people who demonized the serpent the loudest, they kept its symbolism for themselves. Hidden in plain sight. Look at the Vatican. The audience hall, where the Pope speaks, is literally built in the shape of a serpent's head. The eyes, the scales, the curved fangs, it's all there. Architectural receipts. The place that tells the world the serpent is evil, delivers its messages from the mouth of a giant serpent. Tell me that's an accident. You can't. Because they know the truth. They've always known. The serpent was never the villain. It was the symbol of enlightenment. And the empire did what empires always do. They hid the sacred symbol in their own architecture and told the masses to fear it. That's the real pattern. Take the knowledge, lock it behind walls, demonize it publicly, use it privately. When the Spanish conquistadors, backed by the Catholic crown, arrived in the Americas, they didn't just conquer, they carried the Inquisition with them. And here's the part that blows my mind. They didn't just stumble into a new land. They stepped into a world whose very name carried a secret. Many alternative scholars point out that the name America echoes an ancient indigenous root, Amaru or Amaruca, which translates to Land of the Plumed Serpent. The Amaru, known as the Cosmic Serpent, is a massive double-headed serpent, part puma, winged, dwelling underground. It represents infinity, knowledge, cosmic renewal, and the bridge between worlds. A being that moves between the earthly realm and the spiritual underworld, a traveler through dimensions. And here's a fun fact for fans of Tupac Shakur. His middle name is Amaru, after Tupac Amaru II, a descendant of the last Inca ruler who was executed in 1781 for leading a rebellion against those same Spanish conquistadors. Tupac means royal or shining, and Amaru means serpent. The Amaru lineage still exists in Peru today. Now hold that in your mind for a second. Amaruca, Amurica, not the land of Yahweh, not the land of Rome, and certainly not named after some Italian explorer, Amerigo Vespucci. That was just another layer of narrative control. The oldest meaning points to something entirely different: the land of the feathered serpent. The white-skinned, bearded culture bringer, the teacher, the civilizer, the bringer of knowledge. Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan. The same serpentine wisdom-bringer archetype found in cultures, not just across Mesoamerica, but all over the world. So when Cortez arrived, and the Aztecs saw a white-skinned, bearded man, they thought their god had come home. But instead of the returning serpent of wisdom, they got the agents of the Inquisition. They got forced conversion. If they didn't convert, they got genocide. They got the same machinery of suppression that wiped out the Cathars. You might ask, aren't the Aztecs the ones who sacrificed thousands of people? So it was justified, right? Because they were evil. Well, yes and no. There is archaeological evidence of human sacrifice, but, hear me out, as we know, history is always written by the victor, and in this case, it was recorded by the Spanish chroniclers after the conquest. They say the story comes from the Mexica-Aztec creation story. The Aztecs were told by their god to settle where they saw an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a serpent. This omen supposedly marked the location of Tenochtitlan, the future Mexico City. But here's the thing, the god that told them that? It wasn't the peaceful feathered serpent, it was a different god altogether. Huitzilopochtli, a militant storm god that suddenly appeared after Quetzalcoatl left, or was forced out. Yep, you heard me right. Another storm god. And right after that shift, the Aztecs transformed into a human-sacrificing military superpower that dominated the entire region. And all you need to do is look at the image on the Mexican flag to see exactly what happened there. It is the same old story playing out again. The same symbolism, the same patterns. When the serpent falls, the eagle rises. When wisdom is removed, domination takes over. So, I wasn't surprised to learn that none of the surviving pre-conquest Aztec codices mention this famous prophecy of an eagle perched on a cactus devouring a serpent. That entire story comes from post-conquest documents which were written under the supervision of Spanish friars after the original libraries were burned. Think about that for a minute. The empire that destroyed the indigenous wisdom is the same one that preserved the only written version of the Aztec origin myth. How convenient. And basically, we just took their word for it. But that tale we're given, the eagle conquering the serpent, isn't ancient. It's a political narrative crafted by the conquerors. The original serpent wisdom of Quetzalcoatl wasn't just erased, it was overwritten. And in this case, it was by a new militant storm god who just so happened to rise to dominance right before the Aztecs suddenly become this human-sacrificing, war-driven empire. It's the same archetypal battle between the serpent and the eagle, which can be found all over the ancient world if you peel through enough layers. And the codices that might have told a different story? Thousands of years of astronomical knowledge, mythological history, and sacred teaching. They were turned to ash, or so we're told. What I wouldn't give to be a fly on the wall in the Vatican library. But why? Why burn the codices, erase the wisdom, and slaughter an entire culture? Because the empire of control cannot tolerate competition. Not from Gnostics, not from indigenous wisdom, not from ancient star knowledge, not from any tradition that remembers a god other than the jealous one Rome had adopted. Whether it was the Essenes hiding scrolls in caves, the Cathars defending their mountain fortresses, or the Mayan and Aztec priests guarding their celestial knowledge, the pattern never changes. Suppress the serpent, demonize the wisdom, erase the divine feminine, and demand obedience. And that brings us to the most successful suppression campaign in history. It wasn't carried out with swords, it wasn't carried out with fire, it was carried out with a book, the King James Bible. By the time you get from the Septuagint to the Masoretic text, you've already seen 1,000 years of edits. After the Hebrew editors reshaped the text, another pair of hands got involved, the hands of a king. King James, the man whose name is stamped on millions of Bibles sitting on nightstands across the world. We're told King James was a holy, pious ruler. Newsflash, he wasn't. James was a political strategist obsessed with absolute control, but he had an even darker obsession, demonology. Years before he ever commissioned his Bible, he wrote a book called Demonology. And let's be clear, this was an instruction manual on how to hunt, interrogate, torture, and execute witches. And he didn't just sit on a throne and issue orders. He personally supervised the North Berwick witch trials, where dozens of people, mostly women, mostly healers, were tortured and killed. Why? Because a storm hit his ship, and instead of blaming nature, he blamed witches. This is the man responsible for the most popular Bible in the world. So let me ask you this. Do you think a man who saw the devil in every midwife who understood herbs, a man who panicked at women's knowledge, a man who believed healers were threats, would ever allow the true nature of the divine feminine to remain in his translation? Absolutely not. It was under his oversight that the translation became aggressively patriarchal. Take Exodus 22:18. In the King James Version, it reads, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." That single line became the legal and theological justification for burning thousands of women over centuries. But the original Hebrew word is kasaf, a term referring to someone who uses harmful potions, a poisoner, not a magical woman, not a healer, not anyone with spiritual power. But James needed a villain. Just like the archons needed to suppress Sophia,
just like the church needed to erase Asherah, just like the scribes needed to silence the Divine Mother in every culture, James needed an other to fuel his paranoia and solidify his power. He didn't give the world the untouched word of the Most High. He gave us a Bible filtered through the mind of a witch hunter. A text meant to make you doubt your intuition. A text crafted to sever you from the feminine current of wisdom. A text designed to keep you dependent on the very system that enslaved you, keeping patriarchy at the center. Designed to make you bow to a jealous king, both earthly and divine.
So if the Bible is a crime scene, where's the body? I found it in Deuteronomy 32, 8-9. This is the fingerprint smudged on the doorknob, the one they hoped nobody would dust. Open a modern Bible, and it says that when the Most High divided the nations, He set their boundaries according to the number of the sons of Israel. But there's a problem, a big one. Let's check the timeline. When these events supposedly happened, Israel wasn't a nation. Israel didn't exist as a kingdom until around 1000 BCE, and the modern state of Israel, that didn't show up until 1948. So who exactly were the sons of Israel supposed to be? Back then, Israel wasn't a place, it was a person. Jacob, who was renamed Israel after wrestling with a divine being. So let me get this straight. The Most High divided the entire earth based on the number of children one man had? That makes zero sense. But if you go to the older source, before the redactors tried to sanitize the theology, you find a very different reading. The Septuagint, written centuries earlier, says, according to the number of the angels of God. The Dead Sea Scrolls say, according to the number of the sons of God. Suddenly, everything clicks. The original worldview wasn't monotheistic. The text clearly says the Most High, El Elyon, divided the nations and assigned them to divine beings, a divine council, a cosmic board of directors.
But Yahweh's portion is his people, Jacob, his allotted inheritance. Deuteronomy 32:9.
Do you see what just happened? The text clearly distinguishes between Elyon, the Most High, and Yahweh. Elyon is the cosmic CEO, dividing territories and handing out nations to the sons of God. And Yahweh? He doesn't get a territory. He doesn't get a city. He doesn't get a region. He gets a bloodline, Jacob's bloodline, and nothing else. Every other deity receives an actual land, a domain, a region they oversee. Yahweh receives a wandering people with no land of their own. So what does he do? He takes it. He sends his chosen tribe into Canaan, a region already assigned to other gods in the Canaanite pantheon, and tells them,
in the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. Do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them. The Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. As the Lord your God has commanded you. Deuteronomy 20:16.
This wasn't holy destiny. It was a divine coup. A conquest driven by a God who wanted what the others had but didn't receive. And once you see that, the entire story of the Promised Land looks different. It wasn't promised. It was taken. And here's where the thread stretches straight into the present day. The land Yahweh wanted, the land he ordered Israel to seize, was Canaan. And Canaan isn't some mythical place lost to time. It's the same strip of land the world is still fighting over today, the region we now call Israel and Palestine. When you understand that Israel's origin story was built on a conquest of a land assigned to someone else, you start to see something uncomfortable. This isn't just ancient history. The territorial conflict didn't begin in 1948. It began thousands of years ago, in the Bible's own founding mythology, when a tribal storm god without a homeland told his followers to go take someone else's.
Go, take the land of Canaan.
But over the centuries, the editors didn't like that version. They wanted their tribal storm god to be the god, so they removed the other sons. They demonized them. They replaced sons of God with sons of Israel. They blurred the lines. And eventually, they merged Elyon and Yahweh into a single figure, God. They committed identity theft on a cosmic scale. They took a regional deity and put him on the throne of the Most High. Now, skeptics might say, okay, maybe the translations are messy, but it's still the same God. Is it? Let's start with how this God introduces himself. He doesn't say, I am love, or I am truth. He says,
For the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Exodus 34:14.
Jealousy isn't enlightenment. It's insecurity. It's fear. And if you were truly the infinite source of all creation, what exactly would you be jealous of? You can only be jealous if you know you have competition. And Yahweh's behavior throughout the Old Testament, it proves it. Take 2 Kings 1. King Ahaziah is injured in a fall. He sends messengers to Ekron to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of that city, for healing. Now here's the part the church never explains. Baal-zebub wasn't originally Lord of the Flies. That was an Israelite insult, a smear campaign. His original title was Baal-zebul, Exalted Lord, Prince Baal. And the word Baal itself doesn't mean demon. It means Lord, usually the local deity of a region, the protector, the guardian. There were many Baals, Baal of Peor, Baal-hadad, Baal-melkart. Each lord is tied to a specific city-state. So when Ahaziah sends messengers to Baal-zebul, he isn't committing some insane act of rebellion. He's going to the healing god of that region, a perfectly normal, rational move in the ancient world. And how does Yahweh respond? By absolutely losing his mind. He sends Elijah to intercept the messengers and scream,
Is there no God in Israel that you needed to inquire of Baal-zebub?
What follows is a death sentence for consulting the wrong deity. It's the divine equivalent of, how dare you get a second opinion from another god? This is not the reaction of a universal creator. This is the reaction of a territorial storm god, furious that someone walked across the street to the competitor's temple. Yahweh isn't acting like the infinite. He's acting like a threatened local deity watching his market share disappear. Because deep down, he knew he wasn't the only god in town. He wasn't even the biggest. He was just one among many, and he wanted what they had. So he took it. Look at the showdown in 1 Kings 18. 2 bulls, 2 altars. Whichever god burns the sacrifice with fire wins. The prophets of Baal cry out. Nothing happens. Yahweh sends fire from heaven. And Elijah immediately orders a mass execution of every Baal prophet. This isn't enlightenment or divine wisdom. This is a regime change murder spree, a purge, a holy war justification, a propaganda stunt meant to delegitimize Baal, erase a competing cult, establish Yahweh as the only acceptable deity, and justify genocide of religious rivals in the name of God. It is literally the ancient Near Eastern version of
Our God won the controlled demonstration. Now, kill everyone who disagreed. And then, just to seal it, they rewrite the story so the losers look evil, erase their names, and spit on their legacy for the next 3,000 years.
So who exactly was Baal? Let's clear the fog. When most people hear Baal, they picture a horned demon demanding children, maybe even merged in their minds with Molech or Baphomet. But that image doesn't come from archaeology. It comes from propaganda. The Baal cycle is an Ugaritic text found at Ras Shamra, ancient Ugarit, in 1928, dated to roughly 1300 to 1100 BCE, centuries before most of the Hebrew Bible was written. And what do these older texts tell us? Baal was a son of El, a storm god, a fertility and rain god, a healing god, a protector king. His titles? Rider on the clouds, Prince Baal, Lord of the earth. He was their rain bringer, their life giver, their defender against chaos. Not a demon, not a baby eater, not a goat-headed monster. So what happened? Identity theft. Over time, the Bible quietly transfers Baal's titles to Yahweh, Rider on the clouds, originally Baal's epithet, later applied directly to Yahweh, Psalm 68:4. Sea monster battle. In the Baal cycle, Baal defeats Yam, Sea, and Lotan. Later, the Bible claims Yahweh defeated Leviathan, Isaiah 27:1, Psalm 74. Same myth, different God. Except the older versions of these stories were buried in ancient Ugarit, already baked into clay for centuries before Israel ever put pen to parchment. Everywhere Yahweh spreads, he doesn't just coexist with other gods, he absorbs them. He takes their titles, their myths, their powers, and then demonizes the originals. And before anyone says, "But what about Molech?" let's stop right there. Molech wasn't even a god. The original word was molk, a technical term for a burnt offering, a type of sacrificial rite, a ritual, not a deity. Biblical translators later misread the consonants and accidentally invented a demon. Over time, sermons blurred everything together. Baal, Molech, Satan, Baphomet, all rolled into one cartoon villain. But if you actually look at the older sources, the Baal equals Molech equals child sacrifice demon narrative falls apart. And here's the darkest part. Projection is the first language of power. The Bible accuses Baal and other gods of demanding child sacrifice. But who is the only deity in the text who actually commands a father to kill his own son? Yahweh, Genesis 22. Who slaughters the firstborn of an entire nation in one night? Yahweh, Exodus 12. Who says in Exodus 22:29,
"The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me"?
Yahweh. And in case anyone wants to call that symbolic, look at Judges 11. Jephthah sacrifices his own daughter to Yahweh as a burnt offering. No angel stops him. No voice intervenes. Then read Ezekiel 20:25-26, where Yahweh literally admits,
"I defiled them through their gifts, the sacrifice of every firstborn, that I might horrify them."
The writers projected their own deity's darkest traits onto their rivals, then wiped those rivals out and wrote the history books. Now that the smoke has cleared and the monster collage has been stripped away, we can see Baal for what he was, just a rival storm god. And we can see Yahweh for what he is, a jealous, territorial deity who needed propaganda, violence, sacrifice, and erasure to keep his throne. Which brings us to the next question. If this being demands blood, feeds on fear, and rules through jealousy, what exactly are we dealing with here? What does Yahweh demand from his followers? Food. Literal food. So let me ask you this. If God is spirit, why does the Old Testament obsess over burnt offerings? Leviticus is basically a cookbook for ritual slaughter. Animals butchered in precise ways to produce a sweet savor unto the Lord, a pleasing aroma. Kind of sounds like molk, doesn't it? The true source of life does not need the smell of burning flesh to feel satisfied. That doesn't even make any sense. But a lower entity? A hungry entity? A being who feeds on fear, sacrifice, and spilled blood? That is exactly how the Gnostics described the demiurge, a counterfeit creator sustained by suffering. But it didn't stop at animals. Enter Abraham and Isaac. We're told this is a story of faith. Faith? Really? No, it's the story of a deity demanding the blood of a child. A being who tells a father to take his own son, his only son, up a mountain and kill him, just to prove loyalty. And then at the very last second he says, "Stop, I was just testing you." Like, what? Just kidding, bro. My actual first reaction when I read this as an adult was, what the fuck? That's not divine love. That's psychological torture. That's trauma bonding. That's the behavior of an abuser ensuring total obedience. That's not God. That's a monster. And here's where the mask slips. If this being demands blood, feeds on fear, and rules through jealousy, then who is really ruling this world? Well, the Bible actually tells you. 2 Corinthians 4:4 calls the devil the god of this age. John 12:31 calls him the ruler of this world. So ask yourself, if the devil is the ruler of this world, and Yahweh also claims to be the ruler of this world, are we dealing with 2 different beings or 2 different masks? Because when people live in fear, fearing hell, fearing punishment, fearing a jealous God, they are literally feeding this entity. They are giving away their power. Because once you realize the so-called God of this world is not the one true source, it's not the monad, and it's definitely not the Father of Light, you begin to understand why someone had to come teach a different path, a different Father, a different kingdom, a different truth. The moment you open your eyes, you glimpse the shadow beneath the veil. You see the strings, and the archon shrivels as you reclaim what it fed on. You starve the beast. You take your power back. And that brings us to the one figure who saw through the deception completely. Enter Jesus. Growing up, we were told that Jesus was the Son of Yahweh, that he came to pay a debt, that God was so furious with humanity that the only way to calm him down was to torture and kill his own son. Let's be real. If a human father behaved like that, we wouldn't call him holy. We'd call him a psychopath. Yet this was packaged as divine love. No. I went through the New Testament. I checked, double-checked, and triple-checked. Not once does Jesus ever call God Yahweh. In fact, he never uses the name of the Old Testament storm god. Instead, he uses one word over and over. Abba. Father. Not the jealous patriarch, not the warrior deity, not the raging sky god demanding sacrifices. He was speaking of a different source entirely. A father of light. But you can't have a father without a mother. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Enter the divine feminine. Chokmah, Sophia, Anat, Ashira, Inanna, Isis. The mother goddess, the holy wisdom. Erased from the story long before Jesus ever arrived. Cut out of the text, scraped from the temple, reduced to a footnote. Then rewritten as everything she wasn't, a demon, a serpent, a temptress, a threat, anything except what she actually was, the missing half of God, the co-creator, the sacred balance, the breath behind the word. So when Jesus spoke of Abba, he wasn't invoking Yahweh. He was pointing upward, beyond the storm god, to the source that holds both, the masculine intellect and the feminine wisdom, the Logos and the Sophia, the Father and the Mother. Two flames, one light. And that is exactly why the empire had to silence him. Not because he challenged Rome, but because he challenged the theology Rome inherited, by restoring the part of the divine they tried so hard to bury. In John 8:44, he looks the Yahweh-worshipping leaders in the eye and says, "You are of your father the devil. He was a murderer from the beginning." He wasn't insulting them. He was exposing their deity. He was calling out the false god, the jealous one, the violent one, the one who destroyed the feminine, the one who demanded blood instead of balance. And here's something else I noticed. The New Testament contains a moment that proves this wasn't a one-time accusation. The religious leaders accused Jesus of performing miracles by the power of Beelzebul. Remember that name? Not the Lord of the Flies insult, but his original title, Prince Baal. The editors tried to smear it later, but here, the older name slips through the cracks, and the accusation is revealing. They aren't calling Jesus demonic. They're accusing him of tapping into the power of a rival god, the very deity Yahweh spent centuries trying to erase. This tells you two things. One, the older pantheon was still remembered. And two, Jesus wasn't following Yahweh's script. And Jesus' response? He doesn't say, "I do miracles by Yahweh's power." He says, "A kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. If Satan casts out Satan, how can his kingdom stand?" Matthew 12:25-26. Look carefully. He never confirms Yahweh. He never uses the divine name. He never says, "This is Yahweh's power." He reframes the accusation by pointing out their logic is flawed, not by defending Yahweh. Why? Because he wasn't aligned with the jealous tribal deity. His teachings bypass Yahweh entirely and connect to the higher source, the Father of Light, not the Lord of War. Church tradition says this scene proves Jesus is divine, that Jesus' power comes from God, that Beelzebub equals Satan, and this is about spiritual warfare. But that interpretation only works after centuries of theological editing. If you read it in its original context, this story exposes the culture war between Yahweh's priesthood, the remnants of older Canaanite religion, and a teacher, Jesus, who didn't fit neatly into either. This is why the moment is so explosive. The name Beelzebul only makes sense if the older gods were still a threat, and if Jesus was teaching a path outside the monopoly Yahweh's priests controlled. This is the Christos walking into a world where rival deities still lingered in the cultural bloodstream. The Beelzebul accusation isn't evidence of Jesus' divinity. It's evidence of the theological war happening behind the scenes. A war the church later tried to bury by collapsing every rival deity into the devil.
So why was he killed? Because he threatened the power structure. He threatened patriarchy. He threatened the monopoly on the divine. The church turned him into a martyr, a human sacrifice to appease an angry God. They took the messenger and built a religion around the man, instead of the message. But the Gnostics knew the truth. Jesus didn't die for your sins. He died because he exposed theirs. He was the whistleblower in a world ruled by a false god. And like every empire throughout history, from Eden to the Cathars to the witch hunts, they silenced the ones who carried the wisdom, the Sophia, the spark of the divine feminine and the light. But here's the secret they couldn't bury.
They killed the man, but they couldn't kill the Christos. The Christos is the divine spark woven into every soul. Not male, not female, both. In perfect union. The union they tried to sever. The balance they outlawed. The power they feared. You don't need to fear a jealous God. You don't need to carry sins you never committed. And you certainly don't need to bow to a deity that despises the feminine half of creation. You only need to remember who you are. The kingdom isn't in a church or in the sky. It isn't locked behind religious dogma. The kingdom is within. And when the divine feminine rises up beside it, that's when the prison collapses. That's when the illusion shatters. That's when the false god finally loses his throne.